these are not closing remarks, it's actually a closing panel on the future of authentication. So I'm going to bring up Bob Lord, who's our featured keynote speaker, who you all know. Thank you for being here, Bob. And Pamela Dingle and Christian Brand, and we'll have a little discussion to start to tie a bow on things for Authenticate, although Christian might be here at 4:55.
Right, Carol.
I'll message Christian. Wait, I see him, here he comes running in. Pull the fast one on him, like, that's really not good panelist or moderator etiquette to change the start time.
Yep.
Christian, we started early, sorry.
I answered for you.
Bad etiquette on my part.
I committed you.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't believe what you just agreed
Yeah.
to.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to start to tie a bow on Authenticate here with this roundtable discussion. So thanks again to all three of you for everything you've done to support Authenticate and everything you do in the community to push vital authentication with your companies, and Bob just as a general advocate of through everything you do. So Bob, I'm going to start with you. You kicked things off this week, and here we are closing things out. Like I said, we're very appreciative of your participation, but I'd be curious to get your general impression of what you saw through this conference. What's your takeaway from Authenticate?
Yeah, so I think a few things. One is this was a great conference, and so I had a great time. The staff did an amazing job. For me, it was just smooth, which means they worked their asses off. Also, mad respect for the people working the booths. I've done that many a time, and it is a challenge. So fantastic conference. Yeah, I think I continue to, I'm an optimist, believe it or not, because I have to tell people I'm an optimist, because then I say things and they think, you're a pessimist, and I'm really not. I wouldn't keep doing this if I weren't, if I didn't believe that at some point we'd really be able to make huge progress. And I think what we've seen I was going to say this week, but it's only been a few days, has just been a lot of evidence that we're making a lot of progress. The bad news is that the economics currently favor the attackers, and we have to find ways to overcome that. And I think one of the things that we saw were a lot of really great presentations, some case studies, which I learned a lot from. I think my challenge for next year is for people who are speaking to give really crisp numbers. And I know that's hard. That's why I kind of went first, and I had to go get clearance to say, yes, 100%. DNC staff come in every day. They've got to use their FIDO security keys. And somebody just tweeted at me like, talk about the recovery process. Well, it's not pleasant if you lose your security key or multiple security keys. And that's by intent. Like, we put security before the needs of individuals. And so I want to challenge everybody who's going to be speaking next year to put in hard numbers, whatever they may be, because I think that's where we start to hold ourselves accountable. So that's my challenge.
Okay, thank you. So in my opening comments, I talked about, remember I had the slide up there with all these different identity initiatives and acronyms and such, and talked about how, there are a couple current trends in the market that are starting to catalyze some of these concepts that have been kicked around for years. So things like government-driven identity initiatives, payments, digital wallets, and just a general desire to push towards passwordless. So Pam and Christian, I'd be curious from your viewpoints as Microsoft and Google leaders, what other kind of initiatives are around the corner that might be further accelerating adoption of authentication and identity technologies?
I'm happy to go first. I think we're on the cusp of perhaps solving the authentication problem. I think we've spent the last decade on this. I think we collectively came up with something that scales, something that works for the web first. I think authentication, to a large extent, kind of like cautiously optimistic, saying that problem seems like, the answer is around the corner. Now it's up to us to do a bunch of implementation, and that's happening, sometimes a little bit slower than we would like, but in general, things are moving forward. I think it's kind of like I was telling someone earlier at the conference this week, it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole, right? We've kind of like whacked the authentication problem over the head a bunch of times, but there's other things popping out. Like, for example, recovery, real-world identities, how that identity proofing is going to work. Those are the problems that now starts to demand more attention. It's almost like we've picked the easier technology-wise problem to solve first, which makes sense, and I think we have a great solution in FIDO2 and WebAuthn. However, the other more murky, kind of more social issues exist around how are we going to do identity proofing in the global world out there, where from country to country that differs. There's different challenges. Companies like ours, Google, we don't have like real world offices where people can go to prove their identity. How will we solve those problems? I mean, those are the things we're thinking about right now, and I think that's going forward over the next 5 years, where most of the attention is going to be spent, will be around that. How do I associate a user, as Bob said, right? It's not pleasant when someone loses their security key, right? In the enterprise, that's okay. But on the consumer side, if I make it not pleasant when someone loses their phone, they're probably going to pick a different phone next time. So I think that's the problem for us, is how do we solve that problem in a scalable way while having a reasonable security bar, but at the same time making sure that the UX works.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, I would add that we're in this amazingly luxurious position right now to try to tackle second-order problems. I mean, who thought we could be here, really? I mean, we have actually got a decent answer for the first-order problem that we tried to solve. So it's great that we're now able to look at nuances and subtleties and sophistications that we never could before. So I think that's absolutely brilliant, and we should all be really, really proud of it. I think the next, if you wanted to look into the crystal ball at some of the next most important things, all of the ones that you said, Christian, are definitely there. I think, the word, I'm interested to see the expressions of the faces of the people in the audience, but, does the word provenance ring a bell? Anyone? Yeah, so, I think that's the next question is, can we chain this authentication through, right? Can we actually see which FIDO authentication resulted in which single sign-on token issued? Right, so this drives right towards NIST 800-63 FAL, right? Assertions or assurances. So we have to start doing that kind of work, because the thing that will come next is we now have a system that is live, and we're going to find out just how gameable it gets to be at scale. And so we will need to know provenance. We will need to have remediation. We may need to do risk-based step up even on these incredibly secure authenticators. And that just means we all as an industry have to work together to collaborate on this next adoption-rich part of the journey.
It's interesting. So thanks, Pam. Christian raised the point, talking about how this scales globally, and Steve Wilson, his presentation, talks about how grand ideas, are grand, but you need to think about, how they extend and how they reach everybody. And I think that's an ongoing challenge, both from a design standpoint and a kind of system standpoint. Like, how do you not disenfranchise people who are already at risk of being disenfranchised? Interesting challenge there as well, I think.
For sure. I mean, I'll make the comment, right? It's the same Microsoft Windows code that runs in the US, that runs in Russia, that runs in Nigeria, right? When it comes to recovery and real-world identity, I mean, it is a vastly different space. So you almost need to find solutions, different solutions in all of these different territories. And I think that is going to be not a technology challenge, but maybe part of it will be a technology challenge, but it'll be a giant challenge going forward.
So let me pivot the conversation a little bit. So the other month, Amazon or AWS announced that they're going to give away security keys to AWS admins, which is great, right? So those people certainly should be using keys to access their admin panels and everything else on AWS servers. And Google, has done the same. We talked about how Google's giving away keys to at-risk users. And Bob, you've been involved with handing out keys to campaigns. There's a Defending Democracy initiative from Mike Kaiser, and they hand out keys to campaigns also. But looking at the kind of the cloud side of things, how do we get more cloud service providers to follow suit, and actually make sure that their customers are practicing good authentication, using security keys or platform authenticators? What do we got to do there?
You want to start?
Sure. I mean, we have carrots and we have sticks,
Yep.
right? The question is, which will work better in which use cases? I'm really applaud the folks who want to give these keys away. I think you also need to have the incentives to make sure they get used, and I'm sure that's part of the plan. But yes, I mean, money is an amazing incentive. I'm not saying this as any Microsoft position, so do not quote me. I'm absolved of all corporate representation here. But the question of cybersecurity insurance is an interesting industry-wide possible lever that could be applied.
For sure. I saw this morning, I saw it on some forum somewhere, I'm pretty sure it's legit. Salesforce is going to start contractually enforcing MFA for users from next year, February. And I think it's the rising tide, right? I think in the world, MFA, I mean, okay, given the different types of MFA out there, I think they still have a little bit of ways to go, although SMS is not an option, so at least that's not on the cards. But they're trying to enforce it through contractual mechanisms, and they're saying, well, after February, you'll be in breach of contract. I mean, I'm not Salesforce, so I'm like saying what I saw on the web, but that to me was really interesting. The companies are going that way and actually saying, this is the stance, this is what we want you to do, and that fits in with contractual obligations, insurance. Like, I mean, I think that's the lever that these companies will start to. And at that point, if there is a breach and you were in breach of contract, you didn't do like MFA, I guess, like the company simply steps away and says, well, that's on you.
Yeah, and I think what we need to do is, and part of the reason I keep saying I want to see more stats is because that helps inform what we should as a community be doing. And one of the things that I'm increasingly convinced of is that we need to hold the vendors accountable for the security outcomes of their customers. And so I think giving away keys is a nice first step, but we need to start to see the organization say, we've run the numbers, we understand what the nudges have been in the past, and we've nudged pretty hard, and it just has only gotten us so far. And it's just not responsible for us to not take further action, to do something. And I think different companies are going to come up with different things. Maybe it'll be contractual. Maybe you'll say, you know what, 20% of the features of your admin console will no longer be available to you until you turn on even weak two-factor.
Yeah.
And so I think we just need, as an industry, to start thinking about holding ourselves accountable, for each company to hold themselves accountable for the security outcomes of their customers. And that's very difficult, and it's a very different mindset. But I think if you take a look at your slides, which talked about the rise of phishing overtaking malware in 2016, if I understood that right?
Yep.
So I think we have the evidence now, and we just need to kind of reframe things and say things that we would always have delegated to the customers, we're just no longer going to do that. We know that that doesn't work. So let's just get out ahead of this because the next year is going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, we negotiate guest access, right? We negotiate guest access, and there are tools we could use that are not well used in the industry necessarily today. Tools like authentication context. You can demand, you can't guarantee that a partner will properly populate their authentication context, but you can take a step forward of requiring them to give you the authentication context. Whether or not you have authenticated using some kind of multi-factor authentication, for example. That's, in some sense, you have to start socializing that early because it's going to take time.
Or proof of possession, which is just added to the OIDC spec.
Yep.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm very,
absolutely.
very happy with that. So, yeah, I agree.
So by the way, we're happy to take questions from the audience, and Megan, anyone online too. So if anyone has questions, store them up and raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll keep with my questions, which I know what those are. So a lot less fun. So think of some questions, please. In the meantime, so one thing I was talking about, Bob, your observations of the show, and I've been observing things also. I was really happy to see how many people attended the UX sessions yesterday, and that's an area near and dear to me, and it's a recurring theme. Usability is just an ongoing theme you hear about. So if multi-factor authentication is going to be used at scale, it needs to be usable. We need to think about how we're constructing and driving these user journeys. Don Cardinal talked about yesterday for FDX also how important usability is in open finance. It's just a recurring theme, which is good. So coming back to Pam and Christian as kind of the core platform providers, how are you thinking about usability? As we talk about the consumerization of authentication and security. How's this being manifested in your own products and platforms?
Sir?
I'm happy to. Sometime this week, I'm kind of smiling. I've been talking to someone, I can't remember exactly who, or maybe I just don't want to say who, but I'm talking to them about cable, and they're like, shut up about cable. You've been telling me about cable for the last 5 years, nothing's happening. And actually, it's the inverse of that. A lot has been happening, but a lot of it is about UX, right? We're kind of like the second version in trying to, and for the folks here who don't know, like part of what we have in FIDO today is the ability for you to have an authenticator, like a physical security key that you can attach to a machine. We think FIDO and WebAuthn will really start scaling once the thing that everyone carries with them, their mobile phone, can become their authenticator and can become their remote authenticator. In other words, I'm on a laptop or I'm at a kiosk, I'm at an ATM, my phone becomes my FIDO authenticator. The question is, how do I attach that phone to that remote machine? FIDO principles tells us we need some level of proximity, right? If we don't have proximity, we're back to phishable authentication. Bluetooth seems to be the thing that's available in these devices, but Bluetooth is horribly broken. Bluetooth works well in cars for audio. That's been relatively okay, but in other places, like Bluetooth is just really hard to work with, and we've discovered that. And then in some cases, we're past the Bluetooth issues, but we still have problems with users just passing authentication challenges. And a lot of that comes down to UX. It just comes down to the way in which things are presented, the way in which things are jarring to users who's not used to having to go to a phone and do something and then come back. Even just asking a user to turn on Bluetooth at this point, given where we are in the world with privacy and all these other things, is like, my Android phone is telling me to turn on Bluetooth when I want to log into Google. I mean, what's that, right? So we have a lot of these issues that we have to try and overcome. And UX is at the very, very heart of it. And I think that's the mode we're in right now, is testing and iterating and going back and trying to come up with something that users will accept. And that's hard. That's not the easy part. I want to say the easy part is the bits and bytes. The easy part is figuring out the protocols. These are the hard problems that we're now in the kind of the last mile that we now need to start solving.
Right. I think too, I'm so excited that we actually recognize it's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, when I started in this industry, there was the whole, have you heard of a PEBCAC error? Problem exists between chair and keyboard,
Yeah.
right? Like it was mostly about, the users are dumb and you'll never teach them and all of this. And we're now in a state where we actually are working hard to create things that are intuitive. And that's amazing. It really is. But we're also moving into a different world. I mean, yeah, BLE is a problem now, but we're creating a solution that's going to be, here for decades, if not longer. And so we're just going to see this constant virtuous cycle now, where the connectivity gets better, which means the pairing gets better, which means the prompts get better, which means there's less of a disintermediation. It's all going to chunk forward now, as long as we stay vigilant and as long as we care. And I think we care now.
Yeah, and I think that's right. So it is very good news that we're having these conversations now. Having said that, I challenge any of you to go to your friends and relatives and go to Facebook and then Twitter and then Dropbox and then whatever else you like to do. Turn on any form of two-factor, preferably FIDO keys, and if you can get through the evening without people screaming at you, you've done a good job. And so I think there's still, and I appreciate all of the other long-term things that you've got in the pipeline, because I think that's really key, is to have that vision. Today, many of the primary companies that have been great at being first movers, and so, by the way, thanks to all of those folks, but they haven't cribbed enough from each other. And so these experiences are needlessly difficult for the average person. And so I think we need to find a way to kind of shake that out too. I'm glad that the conversations are happening, but I think that also needs to trickle down to the actual service providers.
Yeah, and I think from FIDO's standpoint, we feel good about the first kind of UX guidelines that we put out there this year, and we look to do more of that moving forward, because as the industry demands it, we want to make sure we can deliver guidance. Do we have any questions? Megan, I saw your hand up.
I was raising my hand. I have a question from the app. I actually love this question. So if authentication is a solved problem, are we going to need a FIDO 3 ever? Or is the future really just about incremental improvements to FIDO 2 and web authentication?
I'm looking for Dirk, because Dirk has been pitching FIDO 3 to me for the last 2 years. But I don't know. That's a bit tongue-in-cheek. I think we have a really great foundation, to be quite honest, in what we've built here. What's going to be needed on top of this, I think, is extensions. I think there's a lot of other little things that folks want to have solved. Transaction signing, we're starting to play a little bit with things like secure payment confirmation, starting to play in the payment space. I think there's a lot of these little things that we should start looking at, and that FIDO can also help. But I think it's going to be incremental changes rather than a complete revamp from a FIDO 2 to a FIDO 3. At least that's my perception. I'm not sure about the rest of the folks on the panel.
That's my perception as well. Like, we start talking FIDO 3. We have enough branding challenges. I don't want to go with FIDO 3.
Yeah, no.
But I think in general, the way I at least articulate it is that, the authentication specs are robust and mature, and they'll evolve, and they'll address emerging use cases. I think the other work that FIDO is doing, the new technical work we're doing in IoT is fascinating. We've had so much interest in FIDO device onboard this week, and we're making good progress there. So I think that's another adjacent technical work area for us. And then the critical work in identity verification and binding. There's so much work to be done there, which I think is so important. So yeah, I think the authentication specs will iterate. Is it a full net new? I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, we'd need some kind of black swan event. Perhaps, there's a new transport that's like kinetic control or something like that. Then
But even that,
maybe.
I think FIDO 2 can, I think we can work it in. I don't know.
You got to file a patent on that then.
Sure.
Yeah, so, anybody remember SSL v1? No, you don't, because it never left the building at Netscape. And so there's v2 and v3, and then standards bodies come and took it over. So evolution is a normal thing, but the basic public key model for TLS, HTTPS, it remained the same, but it evolved quite a bit over the years. And you're exactly right. Extensions and flexibility were part of, I don't know what the number is, 80% of what actually changed over time.
Yeah.
Any other questions online or in the audience? Anyone? Okay. Well, wait, I see one back there. Hard to see. Is that Stephanie?
it is.
So we have some ongoing activities in the identity verification and binding group, but you kind of alluded, and I was wondering if you would drill down. We need to do more. I think we need to do more than what we're doing, or at least get this done and then move on. And so what do you see on that problem might be some directions for FIDO, or it even belongs in FIDO?
Is that for me?
Oh,
that's okay.
anybody.
Well, I think first of all, I'll start, and then I'll turn over to everyone else. But I think we need to get the work done, and it's very complex work. And we sought out to do this. We announced it 2 years ago. We announced that we're taking on adjacent work areas and IoT and identity, and frankly, it's just been it's important, nuanced, challenging work. So I think we are making progress. Starting with the certification criteria for the DocAuth vendors. And there's other work happening with binding and liveness and all the associated parts that ultimately will come together to allow us to certify and promote possession-based proofing and onboarding. So I think all that just needs to happen. It's just going to take a little time and focus. And anyone else?
I agree that I don't know enough about this space, and that's the problem. We've been focused so much on authentication. I think it's time to kind of widen that gaze a little bit. Ben?
Well, I want to see identity verification with kinetic control. Right? Selfie,
Yes.
selfie with kinetic control.
We'll be
You have to
working
file
on
the
that.
patent.
That's right. I got to get on that.
Okay, so look, let's take a kind of a wrap-up question here. Well, it's late October. Doesn't feel like it, but it is. And after Halloween, every store turns over from Halloween sales to Christmas sales, and then we do year-end predictions. So I'm going to get a head start on that. Authentication headlines for 2022. What's going to be the big takeaway this time next year, or what are you looking for in 2022 for authentication? And I'll start end and come back this way. So Christian, you go first.
You're putting me on the spot here, but I'll go with passwordless is finally here. I don't know. It's the year of FIDO. I mean, we've been saying this for years, but I really have a feeling about it this time. Everything is there. Everything is in place. It's now about turning the crank, really, and turning the crank, on multiple levels, right? Firstly, there's the platform vendors. That's kind of like where we come in. Like, we have to do our job. Microsoft folks are doing theirs. We have the Apple folks who's super involved. Unfortunately, I don't think they can travel this week, but I mean, they've been very, very involved in this work. So this is moving forward. And I think if we keep turning the crank and we don't let up now, I think 2022 will be the year that the technology will finally be there, and then it's just about adoption. And I think that's going to become the next big thing, right? We're starting to think about how do we involve our development relations resources, like how do we now mobilize? But the problem is if you're too early, like we've been talking about FIDO for 5 years, they're saying like, yeah, come talk to me when it's not physical keys anymore. Talk to me when the stuff actually works. And I think that's the challenge. It's like a bit of a build it and they will come, but yeah, we now have to build it, and then hopefully they will come.
So there are going to be two classes of stories. There will be the ones that we have no control over, and then the ones we have some control over. So again, the economics strongly favor the attacker. So those stories are just going to happen. So people are going to continue to, within enterprises and as individuals, they're not going to be using FIDO. They're going to get phished, and people are going to say, oh my God, everyone in the security world told me to use Authenticator or SMS, and I still got owned. And so those stories are going to happen. I think the question is, how do we generate that other set of questions and headlines and news stories that say, except these guys weren't hit. These guys were not hit successfully. Maybe they were targeted, but their people fell for it, but they didn't actually lose anything because they were using FIDO. So I think part of it is we have to evangelize. We have to get out there. I know some CISOs who don't really understand the value proposition of FIDO, so I think we have a marketing communications goal there. But if we really start to move the needle on that, we're going to be able to balance some of that first category of negative stories with some wins, and hopefully it then starts to spiral.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there are going to be some nasty headlines, and they are going to be about phishing, and they are going to be about password spray, and all the things that we know are terrible already. Those consequences are only going to get worse. They will absolutely get worse, and the fact that we have an answer, in some senses, makes that fact just harder to tolerate. But actually, I think the cool thing about 2022 is that things are not going to be headlines anymore. So the fact that a company rolls out 40,000 security keys won't be news, because it's going to happen again and again, and it's going to become commonplace, right? I think we're going to have glancing references to the use of security keys, or we're going to see mainstreams of people using biometric authentication as more so in TV, more so in movies, right? I think that's what we're going to see, right? It's filtering into the fabric of our lives, and that's going to be the cool thing, right? We're going to see kids talking about how they use this stuff, or that's what I'm hoping for, is sort of the not headlines.
The movies is something that resonates with me. I mean, I watched, there was a show called The Flight Attendant, and there was a scene where she was trying to break into somebody's computer and couldn't do it and she brought a hacker with her, and they couldn't break in because there was two-factor. And so, but it's the only example that I could think of in recent memory where something in the public consciousness tied back to these core values, these core behaviors that really do stop the attacks. And we need to find people in Hollywood to help them write their scripts.
Yeah, some FIDO product placements, perhaps.
I love it.
I like it. Okay, well, look, hey, thanks to the three of you so much for everything this week and for joining this panel today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So a couple, you guys, just a couple closing words, and then we'll send everyone on
All right.
their way to Mopop.